You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DMRadio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. Very excited to talk about a topic that used to be kind of sleepy, used to be kind of boring, and it's alive and well now, folks. I can tell you that. Backup and restore, right? That's where you have to back your data up just to make sure you don't lose it. Well, there are lots of new drivers for making sure you get that right these days. Ransomware, pretty hot topic. Ransomware is very unpleasant. If you've never had it happen, knock on wood and hope that you don't have it happen, because if it does happen, it's not fun at all. And that's where people take your data ransom, quite frankly. It happens to school districts, governments. It happened to the Colonial Pipeline. Folks may remember earlier this year where the entire East Coast was hit with gasoline shortages because some hackers got in there and they took control of the systems and they demanded millions of dollars that apparently were paid. And so it's not good stuff at all. So you want to back up your data for that reason, but also for when things go wrong. Also, when you get hacked for other reasons, or if there's just an emergency or a flood or something like that, obviously that's all the kind of thing that you have to watch out for. But also what's really cool these days is a lot of companies figured out you can get additional use out of that backup copy. So for analytics, for example, for data lakes, well, data lakes are not very good with concurrent users. That's one of their shortfalls these days. They're getting better. They're focused on that, obviously. But in the old world of like relational databases, Teradata, and those folks, they did a lot of engineering to enable concurrency of use. So you can have 100, 1,000 analysts all hitting the same data, not a problem. Not so much with data lakes. So now what you're seeing, some companies, like a company I know, Druva, I said to them a couple of years ago, I'm like, oh, you guys are kind of like a de facto data lake. And they laughed at that. But the point being, you can do queries on your backup copy. So now you're not putting pressure on your production environment. It's really interesting stuff. And there are lots of other things happening too. Machine learning is a tremendous use case for backup data, because to train these algorithms, you need to, quite frankly, have a lot of data. And you need to work on the algorithms and make sure it's all doing what it's supposed to do. And that's another interesting and fun use case for backup data. So with that, let's bring in our first guest. We've got Sathya Sankaran from a company called Catalogic. Sathya, tell us a bit about yourself and what you folks are doing in the field of backup and restore.
Hey, thanks, Eric. So I run operations for a software company called Catalogic Software. We've been in the data protection industry for almost 20 years at this point. And we started building backup solutions for all the way back to mainframe to now container and Kubernetes environments today. So a long history, but we managed to evolve along the way as we saw data transform to different shapes and different formats. We built backup solutions for all of those different formats along the way. And we now build a backup service called Cloud Casa. Cloud Casa is a backup service for both cloud environments as well as container environments, and delivered as a service for people that use Kubernetes and cloud primarily today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And since you mentioned Kubernetes, let's dive into that a little bit real quick. And if you could explain to our audience, I'll give my take at this. Kubernetes is an absolutely fascinating project that has come out of Google. And I would argue it is designed to enable multi-cloud, to enable hybrid cloud. And in a sense, it's sort of creeping towards becoming the de facto operating system for cloud computing. So it's distributed compute is the idea. You have these little containers and they contain little bits of instruction for how to do something. And when it has to get done, you launch the container, it goes out into the system, executes, and then goes away, which is fascinating. But in that world, that's a pretty different environment than what we've been dealing with historically in just your on-prem data centers. Can you talk about what some of the challenges are for this new multi-cloud Kubernetes underpinned kind of architecture and why you have to pay special attention in the backup world to that?
Yeah, first, I think why Kubernetes in the first place, right? Like you mentioned, people are moving to cloud for lots of different reasons. Some of them is as simple as, hey, I can get stuff done faster in the cloud. But what is the main purpose of cloud? The purpose of cloud is that it can provide elastic resources, right? So if you are a Six Flags, you're running at 22,000 employees at the peak of a summer and 3,000 employees at the peak of a winter, right? So imagine you as a company have to transform to being a 3,000 employee organization to a 22,000 employee organization. And the amount of workloads that change during a regular year is just fascinating, right? And those kind of workloads are great fit for cloud. Your Thanksgiving, Black Friday shopping peaks are driving a tremendous amount of increase. And you don't have to be designing a system that can accommodate that peak. Instead, you would drive a system where it works on normal days and can automatically grow and auto scale to handle larger peaks, right? That's really what drives a lot of the application development in the cloud today. But the problem is people can often move into the cloud. There are three types of people that are using cloud today. One is the cloud native folks that are actually building their applications in cloud. There is the cloud migrated folks who are just taking whatever is running in their data center and just lifting and shifting and running it on cloud. And then there is the third group, I think, for which Kubernetes is a very important thing, is how do you move to an architecture that can leverage the elasticity that the cloud provides, right? That can leverage the API flexibility that the cloud provides. And I think that's what we call the cloud transformed, or a digital transformation, as a lot of people know that as. There are lots of workloads that are transforming to the cloud, and that is using Kubernetes as the architecture underneath, because it can auto scale, it can auto correct, it can load balance, and it can self-heal. There are a lot of positive things to that architecture, and it is really going to be challenging VMware as the de facto virtualization standard in the world of cloud.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's exactly right. And of course, data is the fuel for all these different applications. It's the fuel for everything you do as a business. And so in talking to a number of other vendors in the space right now, one of the stories I'm hearing time and again is that speed to recovery is crucial. And so, for example, some companies will focus on storing that data in its native format. So whatever application it's used for, there may be some particular data model or some format, and they want to store it exactly as it's kept in the application, such that you can expedite the reloading, if you will, after something happens. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, look, snapshots in snapshots in your production workloads, even if it's for Kubernetes or cloud, snapshots are primarily offering you that capability, right? We used to joke that snapshots are like gym memberships. Everybody's got access to them. Doesn't mean anybody uses them, right? So
that's hilarious.
You can actually have access to snapshots, create snapshots. Look, snapshots aren't going to save you from every possible failure outcomes. We're not. I won't get into this argument of our snapshots backups, but snapshots are one form of backups, and it may be the best way to come back from an attack with something that operates at reasonably the same speed as your production data, right? So it's a great tool out there available for all types of workloads. And if used correctly, I think it can get you back up and running pretty quickly without having to run your car on a spare tire, right? You can actually get a Formula One pit stop if you have a breakdown.
Yeah. That quote is hysterical. I'm typing it right now on LinkedIn. Snapshots are like gym memberships. Everyone has one, but not many people use them. That's funny. Do you see that these drivers, things like ransomware, also the extra use cases we mentioned, machine learning, for example, are those really driving more business your way? Are you getting more phone calls and emails because people have kind of figured out, hey, we really do have to address this?
Yeah. I think. First of all, the first thing that has changed in our industry when it comes to what we do with our customers as a service is that we're seeing that the reasons people are running restores and recoveries are no longer the primary reason is a hardware failure. I've got a system down and it's not coming up and I need to restore. It's almost always now because they have been attacked. Someone has compromised their data sets. My server is not up and running because somebody went and decided to change network configurations and I can't bring it up. So I think you're seeing a lot of that. So cyber attack is becoming a primary reason for why people do restores. So with that, I think how we do restores and everything changes as well in our industry. But we're also, as backup vendors, we offer a very important service to our customers, right? We touch everything that is important to a customer. If it's important, you're backing up. That means we are backing up and we are touching that data set at any point in time. So I think we as backup vendors can do more. And I think we at Catalogic are trying to do more by doing things like vulnerability scans, doing a live IO detection. You talked about machine learning. Is there a pattern of user activity that we can see and say, hey, no reasonable human being will actually have 40 files open and make changes in all of them at the same time and close it in 1 minute? Like there is no normal human being that can do that. So when you see patterns like that, can you alert our backup user saying, hey, your data set could actually be compromised here? So I think what you're seeing with ransomware is certainly elevating the amount that we have to do as a backup vendor to keep our customers' data safe.
Yeah, that's a fantastic set of advice bits right there, folks, from Sathya. Let's go ahead and bring in our other guest. Now we've got Rick Norgate waiting patiently, dialing in all the way from the UK. So thanks for that, Rick. Thanks for your time. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you folks are doing in the area of backup and restore.
Yeah, no problem, Eric. So my name's Rick Norgate. I am managing director of a platform company called Predatar, as you say, headquartered in the UK, also have presence in the US as well. Now, at the highest level, we are an automation and orchestration platform that is built to make the life of backup and recovery professionals easier. Our platform is built primarily to work with the IBM data protection platform stack, so it works with their slightly older backup products and their more modern backup products as well.
Okay, good. And do you see some of these same trends? Are you getting new business because of ransomware, because of people realizing, and this is the one that excited me the most, realizing there's additional value you can get from that backup, right? If it's just sitting there on a shelf, I mean, it has one use case, which is it'll help us if we get attacked, or it'll help us if the system goes down or something. But once you realize, hey, I can actually query this system, that has additional value. That's the kind of stuff that makes IT directors smile, right?
Absolutely. I was quietly nodding away when Sathya was talking. We're seeing exactly the same trends. You look back, even just probably 2 years ago, the types of conversations we were having with customers was really around conversations with the backup administrator. And we'd be talking about things like, what's your backup success rate look like? And typically, if we're having any commercial conversations, it was all around price. How do we get this cheaper? How do we make sure it's really efficient from a cost point of view? Because if you think about backup at its most basic, it's an insurance policy. And no one likes buying or talking about insurance. So, we'd be talking to customers and they want to get you off the phone because it's basically, who wants to talk to an insurance person on the telephone? You don't. You want to get your policy, make sure it gives you cover, and it's obviously cost effective. What we've seen over the last 2 years, especially with the rise of cybercrime, is actually backup now is seen as not this kind of a thing that's in the basement, dealt with by an administrator and never really thought of. It's actually a key strategic defense for businesses to tackle cybercrime. It is your last line of defense, as we call it. If your frontline defenses fail, ransomware gets in, it spreads, it starts to encrypt production workloads, chances are you're going to have to rely on backup to be able to bring that back. So, we're seeing the types of conversations we're having with customers evolving from price and backup success rates to actually talking to security officers, talking to CIOs, and talking about how we can help them modernize backup and then automate some of the more difficult tasks to kind of give them that extra level of resilience and confidence that not should they get attacked, but probably when they get attacked, they'll be able to get back up and running really, really quickly. So it's a much more interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, and that's important, right? Everybody wants interesting conversations, right? We don't want boring conversations. So it wouldn't be good for a radio show, I can tell you that. But I will say one of the arguments that you can make to folks who are maybe not taking it as seriously as they should is that the cost of downtime can be massive. If you're down for, I've seen this happen to organizations, but they're down for days, over a week, for example, you can't get back up and running. You're not making any money. You're making your existing customers unhappy. It could be not just reputational risk. It could be, a devastating event for the company. So do you find that companies are getting better about recognizing that and doing the math on what it will cost them if they do get taken down and are down for a day or a week or a month? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to go far on the internet these days to just get hit with stats of, scary stats about the cost of ransomware. You look at Gartner, they talk about that the lost revenue for businesses on average every day is £35,000, which I think seems a bit low. Obviously, that they've done their research, but even that, for a small to medium-sized business, if you're down for, as you say, weeks or sometimes it can be months, that's a significant amount of cash. So if we can do anything to, halve the downtime, take 25% of the downtime away, 75%, these projects can pay for themselves very, very quickly. What we try not to do with our customers is bore them with stats because they all know the stats. They know it's a problem. We'd rather talk to them about actually how we can help them make sure that their backup is as absolutely as resilient as possible. So should they get hit by a cyber attack, they're in good shape to actually rely on that backup and get back up and running cleanly.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good term there, automation. We got a break coming up here in just about a minute. Everything in a business that can be automated arguably should be automated at some point. And backup is prime territory for that, right? Make sure the backups run automatically. You get alerts automatically, all that kind of fun stuff. Real quick, go ahead.
Yeah, so, if you look at the market today, people are talking about what we call the 4 fundamentals for backup to make sure it's resilient. That's things like immutable storage, so things can't be changed once they're backed up, secure encryption, air gaps, and having third copies of data. They're really, really important. But for us, the primary question is, if I get attacked, can I recover my data? Can I be 100% confident I can recover? And is it clean? And we believe the only way to be confident of that is disaster recovery testing and scanning of backups on a regular basis. Clearly, you can't do that manually. That's where automation comes in. So these tests can be going on in the background, hands off, 24/7, 365.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You're good to go.
Yeah, that's exactly right, folks. You don't want to get burned by this. It's one of those things where if you don't get it right and you do get burned, it's going to be very painful, probably be the end of your job or possibly your company. So we don't want that. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome back here to DM Radio, talking all things backup and restore. You better back that data up, folks. I did want to mention one quick thing we can talk about maybe in the podcast bonus segment is the shared responsibility model of the cloud. We'll get to that later. That's a fun one. But I want to bring our guest back, Sathya Sankaran from Catalogic. And I see on your website, you talk about cloud native backup. And so just for the sake of our audience here, cloud native is this fascinating term, and it means what you probably think it does for a cloud native architecture, the way the cloud works as opposed to the way your data center works, which is very different. And it's different a little bit across the different solutions you can use, Azure versus Google Cloud Platform versus AWS, of course, who got a 10-year head start on the rest of the competition somehow, some way. I'm still not sure how they did that one, but they did it. But I'll throw it over to Sathya to tell us how do you define cloud native, and how does it change the game for data provisioning, data access, and of course, data backup?
Yeah, Eric, we talked about 3 types of cloud workloads, right? One is what we call the cloud native, and then the cloud transformed, and then the cloud migrated, right? So the way we think about it is a cloud native workload is an application that you built in the cloud, and presumably with an architecture that takes the most advantage of what the cloud offers you, which is the API economy, which is the fault tolerance. You're usually running it on someone else's servers. You potentially have a multi-cloud architecture. You can auto scale, self-heal, highly fault tolerant. These are all things that you want in your cloud application. And typically, an application that is built in the cloud is built with all of these things in mind, right? Then there is the adopted citizen world, which is, you've just migrated to cloud, but you now have to transform your architecture to basically take care of running it in an optimized manner. And I think those are also workloads that are, fairly cloud native. Once you make the transformation and adopt to the world of cloud, I think you become cloud native in our world. It comes with it a unique set of challenges, and I think that's what we as a company are trying to address. One of that is the virtualization platform is certainly Kubernetes. The second is, I think, what is one of the most commonly protected workload? It's relational databases today, right? And suddenly everybody is running these databases in NoSQL and running it in the cloud, in cloud databases like AWS RDS or Cloud SQL from Google. These are all platforms where they're actually storing data in. And how do you protect that along with your cloud infrastructure? So I think a new set of challenges. But the main thing that we see as a favorable thing is you probably heard that cloud's first and the strongest use case in every organization is to put their backups in the cloud, because it gives you air gap, it gives you an additional layer of protection. The good thing here is people that are running in the cloud have already accepted cloud as a way of running their data and protecting their data. So for us, I think we don't have to fight the battle of, do you want to put your backup data in the cloud? If your primary data is already in the cloud, they're very often completely open to putting their backup data in the cloud as well.
Yep. I think you typically, what's one of the best practices, I'll throw it over to Rick Norgate here, of backup is, like you mentioned, 3 copies and at least 2 locations, right? You want to have one in one cloud, maybe one in another cloud, or have something offsite. Air gapped is the term that they use sometimes, where you persist the data somewhere and then you disconnect it from the world. So it would be really, really hard, if you want to prevent yourself from getting hacked, just take the computer offline, right? But I'll throw it over to Rick. Tell us about cloud native from your perspective and what you folks are doing there.
Yeah, I think Sathya made some really good points. I think I'll talk just very quickly about one of the trends that we're seeing, certainly within large enterprises, is, again, several years ago, many of these regulated businesses weren't really interested in putting critical workloads into the cloud. What we've certainly seen over the last 2 years with the pandemic is that philosophy changing across many businesses. And we're actually seeing that migration of workloads to the cloud speeding up within businesses that typically would go nowhere near those kind of, clouds for security, for losing control. Which is good in one way. As you say, it gives you that resilience. You can get data into the cloud. You can generally store that on different types of storage, which helps with cyber resilience. You get that kind of logical air gap. So if your primary data centers get hit, you've got that air gapped copy of data in the cloud, which can help. Does come with some challenges though as well. So where we see customers, because typically most organizations we call hybrid cloud, they'll have some stuff on-prem, some stuff at the edge, some stuff within probably multiple clouds. If you're using Office 365, you might have some stuff in Amazon. You'll have data all over the place.
Right.
Typically what we see is customers are using multiple backup products to back up multiple different types of workloads. They might have one backup product for physical, one for virtual, and then something else for cloud. The big problem comes, you then normally have 3 teams managing those backups. Workloads can fall between the gaps. You get hit by a cyber or any kind of outage. Okay, we need to recover these 20 systems. Oh, 2 of them aren't backed up. We thought you were backing them up. No, we thought you were backing those up. So although obviously moving to the cloud is extremely beneficial for resilience and obviously scalability, what you really need to be doing at the same time is thinking about, actually, how do I consolidate down the amount of backup products I've got? How can I get down from where we see maybe 3 or 4 products being used to possibly 2, or even better, 1? The less backup products that you have in your catalog, the more resilient you can be, because you've got less chance of workloads falling through the cracks. And again, when it comes to speed of recovery, you're generally dealing with one team that's got complete control, rather than trying to coordinate and quarterback multiple teams who are all responsible for different slices of the data recovery pie, if you like.
Yeah.
So Yeah, again, I think to summarize, we're seeing a huge growth in people talking to us about we want to get workload into the cloud. We're migrating primary workload there. How do we back it up? Or actually, we just want to use the cloud as a third copy, second site. Should the worst happen, we've got something that's air gapped, something that's safe that we can rely on and start to bring back in a controlled way.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Do you ever see an architecture where you've got a live backup, like a live second copy, basically? So if the primary system gets taken down, the application just looks over this way. Instead of trying to repersist the data into the primary source, it just points at the secondary source and handles it that way. Is that a common architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So, typically what you'll see within, again, larger organizations, if they're in hybrid cloud, this is obviously there's different models. They'll typically have two data centers with active, so they're mirror each other, replication across the two sites. And obviously you'll do a backup. Backup will go into both sites. And then typically that third copy will be put into a cloud on different storage medium. The idea being, if you get ransomware in your live estate, it's a lot harder for that ransomware to jump into the cloud because you've got that logical air gap. And if you're using different hardware, different storage methods, that gives you another level of protection. And typically as well, if you can then use different operating systems for that cloud version compared to obviously your on-premise versions, even the better. What we see still, most customers or most businesses these days are predominantly Windows-based. Their backup servers are Windows. So if you get a Windows attack, that can take your backup servers offline, and then it's probably game over. If you've got a backup copy that's where the servers are using something like Red Hat Linux that has been hardened, it's a lot harder for ransomware to jump from Windows to Linux or vice versa.
Right.
Give yourself that segregation. So lots and lots of things you can do with backup to make it much more resilient and harder for cyber criminals to actually get in and attack. So
yeah, that's very clever. That's actually a pretty clever idea. And I did want to dive into this. I love this shared responsibility model. I researched this probably 6 or 7 years ago before a radio show. And I was quite bemused by what I discovered. And for those who don't know, the big cloud providers will use this term shared responsibility, which basically means you're responsible. They basically are saying, yeah, we're not really responsible for any of that. You better take care of that. Meaning the big providers will handle their end. So they'll try to keep predators out from their systems, but your data and your applications, that's all your responsibility. And a lot of people don't realize that most software as a service applications do not default to backing up your data. So you need to find some way to back it up, whether it's manual or to Rick's point earlier, automated. You want automated backups on critical data assets. You want to bake that into your systems and your processes so you don't even have to think about it. And if some bad thing happens, we wake up and your problem is at least not nearly as bad as it could have been. I'll throw that over to Sathya. What do you think?
Yeah, we joke that shared responsibility is really just proxy for slowly shifting responsibility to the customer, right? And I think that happens quite a bit in any hosted environments. I think there are controllables from a hosting service provider standpoint, and there are things that a user brings in, and with it, with the data sometimes comes the exposure as well. Sometimes you want to give them a lot of flexibility in how you configure your workloads, but with the configuration, you bring in holes in your infrastructure. But I think it's important to look at security as a layered concept.
Right.
There is no one thing called security.
That's right.
In fact, talking about security, we were at KubeCon last year, and our talk was labeled "Backups are the new borders," right? So because people are attacking backups and attacking your last line of defense, but by attacking your backups, and then if you go after your production data, you realize that you don't have another copy to go back to, and then now you're completely toast. Right.
Wow.
So why are these ransomware people targeting backups? That's because they know that's your defense mechanism.
Wow.
And by going after that, you can leave them in a lurch and get them to pay for it. So that's why I think a lot of the things that Rick pointed out, we also try to get into our user base is one, are you being cyber resilient? Are you doing a copy to a different region, different media? Are you doing air gaps? And I think what we do on top of all of that is to also be very proactive in terms of doing vulnerability scans. We look for network vulnerabilities. We look for ports container vulnerabilities. We look for misconfigurations in customer data. Because again, we touch all of this data every day. If it's important to you, we back it up. That means we should be looking at that data and saying, hey, you've got holes here that we can see, and we can see across many customers. So we can tell you ahead of time that you've got a hole and you need to fix it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big deal. And I think, Rick, you were maybe talking about this, or maybe it was Satya, but you do want to be scanning these backups all the time and looking for strange behavior. Like someone mentioned, if one person has 40 files open and he's changed 40 files inside of a minute, that's probably not a person. Like, it's probably an algorithm of some kind that has snuck into your system. And once they're in there, man, it's trouble. Like, if you go to your backup, I think as Satya was just mentioning, I'll throw this over to Rick, and that's where the problem is. Oh no, it's like, kind of reminds me of the SolarWinds hack, where all these people upgraded their software and they upgraded an unfriendly host inside of there. But what do you think about all that, Rick? I'll throw it over to you, Rick. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze on the screen, but go ahead. I can hear you. Oh, we may have lost him for a second.
What we see is, oh dear.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll come back to you after the break. I'll throw this over to Satya. You got to be scanning these backups all the time. And you mentioned that you're able to sense certain patterns of behavior, right? And that's kind of how you solve these problems with hackers. Is there will be a pattern of behavior that is not normal. Someone has to look into it and says, aha, somebody is in here. That's when you have to take action and start the remediation process, right, Satya?
Yeah, Eric, 100%. You have to be scanning backups. You have to be looking for, change rate deviations, which is one of the easiest way to determine whether, you're potentially under attack. So you can detect a lot of patterns in backups because you store a like-for-like copy in your repository, right? But sometimes detecting these hacks in backups is almost too late. And that's why I think you not only do that in the backup side, if you already have agents that are doing backups on the front end, you also do live scan of IO operations and see if there are patterns that you detect. So I think there needs to be scanning on both ends. On one end to see what the IO activity looks like, and the other end, can we see a pattern across a large number of servers? And I think you talk about data lakes all the time. We are effectively a large unstructured backup data lake, and that has a lot of data in there, and there are a lot of patterns in there to learn from.
That's right.
As a backup provider.
Yeah, and that's also, just for the benefit of our audience here, that's one of the reasons why you want to talk to folks like this, because they have experience, they know what those patterns look like. Now, granted, the bad guys are forever changing their tactics, their strategies, how they get in, what they do when they get in. One of the creepier things I've come across is the fact that a lot of times, I think this time has condensed now in the last year or two, but you would get someone to hack into your systems and then they wait. They don't do anything right away. They'll wait like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something, and then all of a sudden, pow! And that's very strategically intended to mess with you. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You are listening to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things backup and restore. We're talking ransomware and the bad guys. And in the break there, I made an analogy to horse flies. Man, if you ever go fishing and some of those nasty guys get after you, they use some of the same tactics. They're trying to thwart your defense system. They're trying to trick you into thinking that everything's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to go ahead and stick my proboscis into your leg and start sucking out your blood. That's what these ransomware guys do. But Rick Norgate, I'll throw it over to you. You can scan for these things, right? Tell us some of the tricks that you've come across for identifying when these bad guys are in there before they start to cause trouble for you.
Yeah, of course. There's a bunch of things you can do. So what we're seeing is ransomware. Typically, when you've been hit, it's in your backups for about 270 days before you notice. So ransomware can sit dormant within your estate for getting on for a year. So obviously, there's lots of things you can do. As Sathya said, there's lots of things at the front end before you even get to backup. Detection tools, behavior analysis on your primary data, network monitoring, lots of things. But with backup, really, there's a number of things you want to be looking at. You want to be looking for changes in behavior to your backups. So suddenly, are we seeing a lot of changes getting backed up that aren't typical? So a backup changes its behavior. Typically, that could be lots of things getting encrypted and locked. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing you really want to be doing is testing those backups on a regular basis, as we talked about before. So, for example, if you're testing your backups on a monthly basis, so once a month at least, you're recovering them into a safe kind of clean room or a quarantine area, checking they will recover, and then scanning those for malware and infections, you will pick that up within your backups without having to wait 270 days to kind of suddenly realize you've been attacked. You pick that up within weeks rather than months and months and months. And I guess if you bring in the behavior detection as well, and then the scanning and the kind of recovery out the back, you can obviously, what you want to be doing is limiting the amount of time that this ransomware sits in your backups dormant, so that if you do need to pull the trigger and use your backup to recover, you're not left trying to either clean corrupted copies or, in the worst case, recover from a year ago, because that, data from a year ago to try and recover a live business, no point. You can't lose a week, let alone 270 days worth. So yeah, lots of things you can be doing to scan and test. Now, as we talked around, you can't do that manually. Large organizations typically got thousands and thousands of nodes, virtual machines, physical machines, cloud data. You need to be, the only way to test that at scale and frequently is using automation. And that's where things like platforms like Predatar will absolutely help. They will automate disaster recovery testing, virus scanning, and give you that kind of real-time anomaly detection of your backups. Combine all that together, that's how you can make sure those backups are clean and that they will recover should you need them to.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And Sathya, I'll throw this one over to you. Another thing is just educating your entire team. One thing I've noticed, because our website has been hacked, 20, 30 times over the past 12 years or so. It's just annoying as can be. And one of the symptoms that I've seen is that stuff just doesn't work properly. Links get broken, pages don't work. There's like simple, strange things happen. And that's a sign that something is in your back end and creeping around and causing trouble. And what we saw was a WordPress hack, which was, downright devious, because they get into your WordPress environment and they start installing all these little files in various folders. And if you ever looked on the back end of WordPress, man, it is not a very simple thing to understand. It's very complex. And of course, it's dynamic. So it can be extremely difficult to get in there. And I remember when it happened to us, I had a big debate with my partner at the time. I said, dude, nuke it, right? Like, who cares? We're not that old. We can lose this data and be just fine. And he fought this battle so we think they're from Russia. We don't know exactly where. It could have been a proxy, but don't fight that battle if you don't have to, right, Sathya?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the education goes from all phases of this, right? So we have to educate the teams on how do you detect, right? And detection is a huge piece. In WordPress, to some extent, is a very visible sign, because you go to catalogicsoftware.com or cloudcasa.io and it's redirecting to a Russian website somewhere, right?
That's right.
So that's easy to detect, but there are lots of attacks that are not so easy to detect. I think one is certainly helping the team understand from a detection standpoint as well. But I think there is also education to be done on, education on backups. I think we talk about the 3-to-1 rule, but if you really go outside of our ecosystem and ask a new person in charge of, say, running a cloud infrastructure and ask them what is a 3-to-1 rule, I don't know if they will know the answer to that question, right?
Right.
So I think that education is also very important in just making sure you're creating adequate copies of data. And the last piece, just as Rick was mentioning, until you actually run restores, you don't know whether you have a good copy. In the insurance world, it's one of those things. I hope I never have to use my insurance, right? That's really what you're trying to do. But only when you use it, you know whether this is a good insurance or not a good insurance. So I think getting people to exercise that data set and not just kind of let it sit dormant, I think it's very important. And I think that education also needs to happen. I would just say all of this education could also be done by just getting it done through professionals, right? This is where I think one of the things we're seeing is, build this whole service, an essential service and a critical service, and deliver it as a service to a customer, make it into a SaaS model, a shared responsibility that is truly shared, where you have to deliver the right SLAs and the SLOs to the customer. I think there is a world where we are going to see a lot of transition of backup and recoveries, especially in the world of containers and cloud, to be delivered as a service.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'll throw it over to Rick to comment on that. There are always new ways of doing things. And I think in the enterprise, more and more companies are getting much more open-minded about using software as a service. But it does add additional challenges. Right now, you've got a really topographically challenging environment. You have to focus on each one of these SaaS solutions that you're working on. Make sure you got all your I's dotted and T's crossed, right? And that takes time. It takes planning. It takes someone who takes responsibility for getting all that done, right, Rick?
Absolutely. And I think I want to talk a little bit about the shared responsibility that you were talking about just a moment ago. So what we're seeing is obviously many organizations, or most of them, are spending, multi-millions or hundreds of thousands on defenses against ransomware. And it's obviously getting harder and harder for cyber criminals to get in, and they're getting more and more creative. One of the fastest growing weaknesses within organizations that cyber criminals are going after is actually using employees to insert ransomware within an organization. So looking for disgruntled employees, people they can bribe, and using them. So this is where shared responsibility models can really help. If you're using a outsourced provider to deliver your backup as a service and they control the backup, you've got another line of defense there, which means even if a disgruntled employee can get into an environment and actually start to insert ransomware or do damage, your backup's segregated from a responsibility point of view. It's managed by somebody else, different credentials, different network. That employee can never get to that. It's another way to lock down your backup. So yes, we talked about before, shared responsibility models can be worrying in some cases where it's shared responsibility, it's actually not. But if you look for a backup outsource or someone that can run your backup for you and take control of that, it can give you another line of defense and just help with that recoverability and cyber resilience. So I think what we're seeing here is there's no one answer to how you use backup from a cyber point of view. Just there's multiple things that you can be doing, both in your backup and your primary systems, to kind of put another brick in the wall. It's multiple bricks, lots of things that you need to do to build up those defenses, not just one thing from one provider. It's multiple things from multiple providers and multiple experts that are going to give you your best chance of staying resilient.
It reminds me of the saying that nobody's ever been fired for having one extra copy. Right. So the layered concept that I think is one of the beauties. You can have multiple layers of protection, and that does help organizations in a big way when they need those backups.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You want to have a strategy. I do think you want to have ideally some single pane of glass, or at least some master process document or something. The more dynamic it is, the better. Quite frankly, the more manual you become, the more manual you deal with these issues, the harder it's going to be. Manual processes will always be painful. People have to follow the instructions. If they're not readily apparent, then they'll just do things their own way, and that's not good for your critical information assets, folks. Well, look these guys up online: Sathya Sankaran and Rick Norgate as well from Catalogic, and Predatar, that's Predatar. Podcast bonus segment is coming up next. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to me. You're listening to DM Radio.